Good morning, everyone, and welcome. This is the Leadership Institute's April Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast. It's my custom at this time to say we live in interesting times. Well, these are very interesting times. We have pending in the Congress a terrible bill to undo the rights of states to set their own election procedures. Some weeks ago, Senator Cruz was involved in a discussion with other leaders as to what would be the proper name for this collection of measures to undo the historic right of states to run their own elections, and they came up with a name for it: the Corrupt Politicians Act. A day or so later, not knowing that they had done this, I circulated widely a suggestion to conservative leaders that we call this set of proposals the permanent power grab. And I wish I'd had a chance to suggest that before they came up with Corrupt Politicians Act, but by whatever name, it certainly is a power grab, and a dangerous power grab. Historians have suggested repeatedly through the centuries that the decision of Julius Caesar to march his army across the Rubicon River was the mark of the doom of the Republic. I think this set of bills is the most dangerous political threat ever to our American Republic, and I know the senator is going to address this issue. I encourage you all to live tweet today's event with hashtag WWCB. Despite the global pandemic in 2020, 14,875 individuals received training from the Leadership Institute, and 8,129 of them completed enough in-person and online training to be designated Leadership Institute graduates. Since 1979, your Leadership Institute has trained 230,788 students. At the end of this event, you will be redirected to the training schedules at the Leadership Institute website, and there you will find all of the upcoming scheduled trainings. Please take a moment to review these schools and consider attending one or sending a friend to a training. If you're joining us over Zoom, there will be a chance at the end of the senator's talk for you to ask questions. I ask that you use the Zoom Q&A function to type in your questions, and we'll submit as many of them as there is time for after the presentation. Ron Naring is the Director of International Programs here at the Leadership Institute. He has served as chairman of the California Republican Party, was the Republican nominee for Lieutenant Governor of California in 2014, and worked as presidential campaign spokesman for our featured speaker today. That was Senator Ted Cruz in 2016. Ron currently lives in San Diego, California, where he was recently elected to local office. Ron, you want to give us a report, please?
Yes, sir, Morton. Let me share my screen here, if I may. So you should see on your screen now a picture of the city of Riga, Latvia. And so since I have the privilege of running the international division here on Morton's behalf at the Leadership Institute, I wanted to share with you a bit of what we've done in specifically in one country, and that is of Latvia, where we've built some relationships and been very active in terms of training over the course of the last few years with some pretty significant results. In Sorry. Here we go. We should all be aware that since the fall of the Soviet Union, as we've seen Russian oligarchs rise in Russia, we've noticed that many of those oligarchs want to get their ill-gotten gains out of the country so they can enjoy it in the West. And one of the conduits that they would use for that was the country of Latvia, the Baltic states, where the Russians have a significant residual presence. Has been used for money laundering and other nefarious purposes, and with an incredible corrupting effect on the local politics. Several years ago, we were introduced to some friends, now friends with a new political party called the New Conservative Party of Latvia. And they reached out to us and with a very strong anti-corruption platform, and they sought training from the Leadership Institute so that they could be successful in getting into the government and putting Latvia on a very strong anti-corruption path. We've conducted a series of trainings there in 2018 and 2019. Several of our Leadership Institute faculty members traveled to Riga, Latvia to conduct training in a variety of areas, including campaign planning, campaign management, communications, and the like. I was joined by Steve Sutton, our Vice President of Development, on one of those such missions, and we brought various other Leadership Institute experts there to Latvia to conduct those trainings. Here you can see a few pictures from those programs. And the timeline is we conducted a campaign workshop and an activist workshop and another candidate workshop in March of 2018 and July of 2018. And in the October 2018 election, the New Conservative Party became the largest non-Russian party in the Latvian parliament, which was a significant accomplishment given that it was only their second time competing at the national level in Latvia. We went back there 3 months later to help them conduct governance training as well, and to help set the stage for their competing in local elections, particularly the Riga mayor election, which is very important. The city of Riga, the capital of Latvia, had been controlled by a pro-Russian party for some time, and that party was defeated in the August of 2020 election, and the candidate of the New Conservative Party became the vice mayor of the city of Riga. That's a very significant accomplishment on the part of the New Conservative Party. In all, your Leadership Institute helped to train 162 students, many of whom are now either in the Latvian Parliament or the Latvian City Council or playing other roles in Latvian public policy today, the most prominent of whom is Jānis Bordāns. You see his picture on the screen right now. He's the chairman of the New Conservative Party, and today he is the Justice Minister of Latvia, a very strong anti-corruption leader in that country. And here's my final slide to share with you a major accomplishment that occurred not too long ago, and that is that the oligarch of oligarchs in Latvia, the man who single-handedly is responsible for all kinds of corrupting influences within the country and participation in money laundering schemes and the like. This is the mayor, now the former mayor of a city there, Aviars Lembergs, has been convicted by a court in Latvia. And there's no chance that this would have happened under the status quo in that country, but it goes to show what one political party can do if they're motivated by sound principle and they have the skills necessary to compete. Closing observation is that it's very difficult for solid conservatives in other countries to advance their ideas when you have an entrenched establishment that might be subjected to all kinds of undue influences and has all the powers of the state. And yet Latvia is a success story with the New Conservative Party that has really moved the ball forward in a positive direction, fighting corruption in this former Soviet country, and that now, of course, is a proud member of NATO and the European Union and the like. So very positive developments. And I wanted to share that story of how the training which the Leadership Institute conducts around the world can have an impact in the lives of others in the direction of other countries. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present this program's report today. And I'm delighted to hear, along with the rest of you, from Senator Cruz this morning. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Morton. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ron. While last year has made not only training in the United States, but international training very difficult, it is certainly more crucial now than ever. Ron's division has maintained conservative partnerships all over the world, and that our international and our domestic programs depend on the generous donors and supporters of the Leadership Institute. And so we thank them. And now it's my pleasure to present to you our featured speaker. Ted Cruz is the junior United States Senator from Texas and has served since 2013. In 2012, he was elected the 34th U.S. Senator from Texas. With a large grassroots base, Ted won a decisive victory in both the Republican primary and the general election, despite having never before been elected to office. Before his time in the Senate, Ted Cruz worked as Solicitor General for the state of Texas and in private law practice. While there, Ted authored more than 80 U.S. Supreme Court briefs and argued 43 oral arguments, including 9 before the U.S. Supreme Court. He also won an unprecedented series of landmark national victories that include his defense of U.S. sovereignty against the UN and the World Court in the Medellin versus Texas case, our Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, the constitutionality of the Ten Commandments monument at the Texas State Capitol, and the words "under God" in our Pledge of Allegiance. Prior to becoming Solicitor General, he served as the Director of the Office of Policy Planning at the Federal Trade Commission, as Associate Deputy Attorney General at the U.S. Department of Justice, and as Domestic Policy Advisor of the 2000 Bush-Cheney campaign. In the U.S. Senate, Ted has fought to repeal Obamacare, to secure the border, and to confirm Justice Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. He has also fought to defend life, marriage, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, and in fact, the entire Bill of Rights. Ted graduated with honors from Princeton University and with high honors from Harvard Law School. He served as a law clerk to Chief Justice William Rehnquist on the U.S. Supreme Court. He was the first Hispanic ever to clerk for the Chief Justice of the United States. Ted and his wife Heidi live in his hometown of Houston, Texas, with their 2 young daughters, Caroline and Catherine. And remember, I encourage you to ask questions using the Zoom Q&A function throughout the senator's talk, and he'll have some time to answer questions at the end. It's my pleasure to present a great conservative leader and a personal friend of mine, Senator Ted Cruz.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Morton. Thank you for that very kind and generous introduction. And it is terrific to join each of you. Let me say what a pleasure it is to be with each of you. Ron Nearing is a dear friend and a tremendous conservative leader. And Ron, thank you for your great leadership in California, really fighting behind hostile lines. And thank you now for your great leadership internationally, defending freedom across the globe. And let me say, Morton always amazes me in that no matter what the circumstances, he manages to be young at heart. And Morton has been battling for liberty since before most of us were born. And you can know a warrior by his scars, and Morton has been standing up for right and principle for a long, long time. I admire Morton. I have learned from Morton. The incredible men and women that Morton and Ally have trained over the decades have been an army defending the Constitution, defending the Bill of Rights, defending free enterprise, defending America. And I have been blessed to go into political battle after political battle after political battle, surrounded by men and women that Ally has trained. So for all of you on this call who are supporters of Leadership Institute, let me say thank you, because you may not necessarily see all of the fruit that your hard work is producing, but I can tell you, we're in a battle for our country. It is a battle that is existential. That battle has waged from the beginning of our nation, but I don't know that it has ever been more intense than right now. The left is resurgent. We have Democrats controlling the White House, and both houses of Congress. And even more ominous, it is the extreme and angry left that is setting the agenda for the Democratic Party. It is the angry socialists whose stated objective is to fundamentally transform this country. They are setting the objective. And I don't believe they will succeed. But the reason they won't succeed is because of the men and women on this call. The reason they don't succeed is because we are rallying and we will rally the American people to defend freedom, and freedom is powerful. Right now, the Democrats are overshooting. They're overshooting in many regards. But let me talk for a couple of minutes about H.R. 1, and then in the questions, I'm happy to talk about whatever topic you like, because there are many topics and issues of concern right now in the country. But let's look at H.R. 1. H.R. 1 or S1, which, as Morton noted, many of us are calling the Corrupt Politicians Act, was the very first bill introduced in the House of Representatives, the very first bill introduced in the Senate. That's why it's H.R. 1 and S1. Pause for a second and reflect that the number one priority for Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer isn't COVID. It isn't immunizations. It isn't jobs. It isn't reopening the economy. It isn't getting kids back in school. The number one priority for Schumer and Pelosi is keeping Democrats in power for the next 100 years. That is their overarching major objective, and everything else is secondary to ensuring that they dominate the federal government for our lifetimes and the lifetime of our kids and our grandkids. That's what H.R. 1 is designed to do. The Corrupt Politicians Act takes every bad idea every left-wing socialist group has had concerning elections, and it rolls them all in together in an 800-page monstrosity. What does it do? It federalizes elections. It puts the federal government in charge of elections. It does it to control those elections and ensure that only Democrats can win. It preempts, it repeals most state voter integrity laws. For example, 29 states have voter identification laws. My home state of Texas requires a driver's license to vote. Just like you need a driver's license to get on an airplane, to drive a car, to get married, to buy a beer, likewise, you need a driver's license to vote. The Corrupt Politicians Act repeals every one of those laws, makes it illegal to require voter identification. The purpose of that is not complicated to figure out. The Democrats don't want voter ID because voter ID makes voter fraud harder. Their objective is more voter fraud. Here's another example: ballot harvesting. 31 states have laws prohibiting ballot harvesting. And what is ballot harvesting? Ballot harvesting is the practice where you send paid political operatives to collect the ballots of other people. So, for example, you have an operative from the DNC that goes into a nursing home and collects a couple of hundred ballots from the residents there, many of whom may well not be competent to vote anymore, not competent to make decisions anymore. That doesn't stop too many of these operatives. It also, ballot harvesting is a situation that invites voter fraud. Why is that? Because the paid operative can see how you can vote. And if you vote the wrong way, if you vote for the Republican, that operative can just take your ballot and throw it in the trash. Never send it in. It never gets counted. And that operative, if they are unscrupulous, if they are corrupt, can only send in the ballots that vote the way they want them to vote. That is a profoundly dangerous practice. Ron in California can tell you just how dangerous ballot harvesting is, because the state of California has institutionalized it precisely in order to lock the Democratic control of the state up. That's their stated objective. The Corrupt Politicians Act repeals every law across the country preventing ballot harvesting, and it mandates ballot harvesting in all 50 states. Not only that, the Corrupt Politicians Act automatically registers to vote virtually anyone, essentially everyone. Anyone who interacts with the government in any way gets registered to vote. So if you get a welfare check, if you get an unemployment check, if you have a driver's license, if you attend a public college or university, you're automatically registered to vote. Now, the Democrats know that doing so would necessarily register millions of illegal aliens to vote. That is not an accidental side effect of this law. That is the intended effect. In fact, the law specifically immunizes those illegal aliens from any liability for being registered to vote, which the bill will automatically register them to vote. The reason for it, of course, is the Democrats want millions of illegal aliens casting illegal votes in elections. In addition, this bill mandates that criminals and felons be allowed to vote. A significant number of states have reasonable restrictions on the rights of criminals and felons to vote. This law obliterates those restrictions. It mandates that anyone, when they're released from prison, is immediately eligible to vote, no matter what. And the Democrats have made a decision that having millions of illegal aliens voting, millions of murderers and rapists and child molesters voting, that will benefit Democrats, because those illegal aliens and those criminals, they understandably believe, are going to vote overwhelmingly for Democrats. Not only that, this bill is also welfare for politicians. Every dollar raised by a federal candidate under $200 is matched in federal money 6 to 1. So if you raise $200, you get $1,200. That would mean, for example, in a Senate race in the state of Texas, you could receive over $30 million in federal funds given to you from the taxpayers effectively. You know, if you think about a population that is truly needy and deserving, it is difficult to think of a population that better fits that description than politicians who desperately need our taxpayer money to fund their campaigns. And by the way, this law specifically provides that from, say, that $30 million you get for running for Senate in Texas, you can pay yourself a salary out of those federal taxpayer money that you're getting. It is the reason we've called it the Corrupt Politicians Act is precisely that. It is designed to keep corrupt politicians in office forever. Let me focus on one final aspect of it. Federal Election Commission was established in the wake of Watergate, the major campaign finance revision to try to reduce corruption in politics. From the very first days it was established, the Federal Election Commission has been bipartisan. 3 Republican commissioners, 3 Democratic commissioners. That was by design, because the objective is to follow the law and not be a partisan cudgel. What does the Corrupt Politicians Act do? It turns it into a partisan cudgel. It removes one of the Republican commissioners. So it makes the FEC 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. Why is that? Because the objective is to weaponize the Federal Election Commission to target every Republican candidate and office holder in the country. I want you to think for a second about what a Federal Election Commission would look like that is run by Chuck Schumer, because that's functionally what this law creates. Every single Republican senator would be fined by the FEC. Every single Republican senator would have multiple investigations opened by the FEC. Every single Republican senator would have pending lawsuits and prosecutions from the FEC, because it gives Chuck Schumer and the Democrats the power to weaponize the federal government to ensure that Democrats never lose. This bill is not designed in any way, shape, or form to reduce voter fraud. In fact, it is designed explicitly to increase voter fraud. It is also not designed to increase participation in any manner consistent with the law. What it is designed to do is take away your right to vote by allowing millions of illegal aliens and criminals to vote, by creating a system where your vote doesn't count. It is a corrupt attempt to seize the power of the federal government for the next century. And so I believe stopping it is an absolutely existential goal if we are going to maintain free and democratic elections in our country.
Okay, you ready for some questions?
Sure.
Thank you very much, Senator. That is great. I'm going to turn the questions over to Deirdre Hackelman, who has been reviewing the dozens of questions which have come in. And again, let me thank you, Senator. Nice to be with you, even if it's only on a Zoom call. Deirdre, are you ready?
I am. The questions have been rolling in, so I hope you're ready, Senator.
Fire away.
All right, we've gotten quite a few similar questions to each other, so I'm going to try to group them together and give you a little more general type questions. But one of our first questions is about, you spoke about elections and making them more secure. What is a proactive thing that we could do? What kind of recommendations do you have, maybe from the conservative side of things, to make elections more secure?
So there are a number of steps that make sense, and we're seeing states at the state level moving forward. Unfortunately, we are not going to see federal legislation move in Congress to enhance the integrity of our elections. And there's a reason for that, which is Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi control both houses of Congress. And the Democrats have made a decision. It's an incredibly cynical decision that voter fraud benefits Democrats. And so they systematically oppose any efforts to combat voter fraud. You look at something like photo ID laws, which we talked about a minute ago. 70 to 80% of Americans support photo ID laws, and a vast majority of Republicans. What's interesting is a majority of Democrats support photo ID laws for voting. A majority of independents support it. The one group that doesn't support it are elected congressional Democrats, and 100% of them oppose photo ID for voting. There is a reason for that, because they understand voter fraud benefits them. About 16 years ago, there was the most credible and serious study of election fraud was a bipartisan commission that was called the Carter-Baker Commission. It was chaired by former Democratic President Jimmy Carter and former Republican Secretary of State James Baker. And it examined voter fraud. It concluded voter fraud is real. It is a significant threat to our democracy. And it had a whole series of recommendations, including that photo ID can reduce the risk of voter fraud, including that one of the greatest risks of voter fraud comes from absentee mail-in voting. And historically, that has been a major source of voter fraud. And it also concluded that an even greater risk of voter fraud is from ballot harvesting. What does the Corrupt Politicians Act do? It literally takes the recommendations of the Carter-Baker Commission and it expands the areas where it says fraud are most likely. So it mandates universal mail-in voting everywhere. We saw in 2020 real problem with universal mail-in voting. The Democrats say they like the outcome because they won that election, so they want it everywhere, despite the fact that, that renowned Republican right-winger Jimmy Carter said that there's a major risk of voter fraud from doing so. All of which is to say, for the next 2 years, the prospects of federal legislation moving to protect voter integrity are zero. Pelosi and Schumer will kill it. There are real prospects at the state level. We're seeing states like Georgia and Texas that are moving forward with reasonable common sense reforms trying to enhance election integrity. I will say in this last election, in 2020, there were too many Republican legislatures who essentially rolled over to the demands of left-wing activists, people like Stacey Abrams, and exposed our election system to very high risks of fraud. And it was unfortunate because you had a lot of Republicans who just did not appreciate the gravity of the threat and were not up to the fight. And they frankly wanted the press to say nice things about them. I will say over the last weekend, this debate metastasized in a very dangerous way. In that in the past weekend, corporate America has been enlisted as the enforcers of the Democratic Party. And this is a trend that has been building for about a decade. But if you look at the Fortune 100 right now, there are very few, if any, conservatives among the CEOs of the Fortune 100. They are almost exclusively on the left. And what has happened is now big companies are scared of their own shadow. For about a decade, George Soros and a number of other left-wing financiers have put serious dollars into building an infrastructure designed to put pressure on big companies so that big companies hear from their employees. They built databases and email lists of employees in each of the big companies. They hear from their shareholders. They hear from the press. They hear from people on Twitter, and they pressure them. And so we saw this weekend, for example, Delta Airlines shamefully coming out and blasting the Georgia voter integrity law. Ironically, doing so just a few days after it had praised that law as being an important step towards enhancing the integrity of elections. Then the left-wing outrage mob began pounding Delta, and they immediately pirouetted and ran away. We also saw Coca-Cola doing the same thing. We saw American Airlines doing the same thing. And most notably, we saw Major League Baseball yank the All-Star game out of Atlanta, move it to Denver, Colorado. Now, ironically, Georgia has early voting for 17 days. Colorado only has early voting for 15 days. So they moved it to a state with a shorter period for early voting. Atlanta is 51% Black. Denver is 9% Black. So the Major League Baseball demonstrated they're so woke and such racial social justice warriors that they yanked the game out of a majority African-American city to move it to Denver, Colorado instead. This is dangerous. This is dangerous that corporate America is being mobilized. And Joe Biden called for this. Joe Biden asked Major League Baseball to pull the All-Star game out of Atlanta, to punish the people of Atlanta, to punish the people of Georgia. And it's not just enlisting big corporations against election integrity laws in Georgia and Texas. This is all designed to enlist big corporations to try to pass the Corrupt Politicians Act. The second shoe that is dropping already and is going to keep dropping is these timid CEOs who are scared of the mob. They want them to go away. And the only way to go away is for them to become essentially the paid lobbyists working for Schumer, Pelosi, and Biden. It is very dangerous. And we in the conservative movement need to be working systematically to change the cost-benefit ledger. Right now, if you're a CEO who's apolitical, let's say you don't really care about politics, you just want to sell widgets, you want to sell your product, you want to do business. Right now, the mob comes after you, and appeasing the mob is a no-brainer because there's all benefits, and these CEOs perceive zero cost. They believe, Delta Airlines believes it will not lose a single passenger despite becoming Joe Biden's woke enforcer. Major League Baseball believes everyone will keep watching baseball. There's no downside to it at all. Coca-Cola believes we'll all have a Coke and a smile, even as they are advocating for tearing down democracy in America. It is really dangerous. And as a movement, we need to change that calculus so that both sides of the ledger are real, so that there is a cost every bit as real and concrete as the benefit of giving into the mob and being complicit in tearing down our democratic structures.
Thank you for that. We're actually going to switch gears, do a 180 here to a very timely topic right now. It's a two-part question. So the audience has wondered what can be done to block vaccine passports, and that assumes all kinds of sides that you would take.
Yeah.
And then the second part of that is, how do you feel personally and politically about the way the vaccines have been rolled out and the government's role in that?
Let me answer it backwards. I'm going to start with the second question, then I'll move to the first question. I think what has happened with vaccines in the last year has been extraordinary. I think it has been remarkable. And I think the Trump administration deserves an enormous amount of the credit that they put together what they called Operation Warp Speed, designed to develop a COVID vaccine as fast as possible. Vaccines typically take 2, 3, 4, 5 years to develop. And in this instance, we had multiple vaccines developed from multiple companies in less than a year. You'll recall in the presidential debates when President Trump said to Joe Biden that we would have by the end of the year the capacity to roll out 100 million vaccines. And Joe Biden laughed at him. The press laughed at him. Everyone said that's ludicrous. It's insane. It's not remotely possible. That is, of course, exactly what happened. By the way, going back to woke big corporations, it was not lost on anybody that Pfizer announced the successful tests of the vaccine the week after the presidential election, which was, they might as well have put a Biden for America hat on every corporate executive when they announced it. So I think it's worth pausing and reflecting that the ability to develop those vaccines is significant. We've now had over 100 million vaccines administered across this country. That is making a major step towards getting us through this pandemic, getting us back to normal. We're in a weird situation. So look, I've had the vaccine. Heidi has had the vaccine. My parents have both had the vaccine. I think it makes sense to get the vaccine. I also think it's an individual choice. If you're not comfortable getting the vaccine, don't get it. We're not getting vaccines for our daughters who are 10 and 12 because the risks from the disease to kids are low enough that we don't want to risk any unintended side effects from the vaccine. But for adults, and particularly for seniors like my parents, we think the cost benefit analysis supports getting the vaccine. It is odd to see the left, even as people get vaccinated, treat government control as a fetish. Look, the left, they are collectivists, they are statists, they are socialists. They believe in government control of you and your life. So masks, the left's obsessions with masks is bizarre. Now, listen, there are all sorts of different views on masks. Personally, I don't fall in either extreme. There are some people who say, I will never wear a mask no matter what. I understand that sentiment. I don't happen to personally share it. I wear a mask when I'm on a plane. I wear a mask if I go to a grocery store or walk into a restaurant. I do think it makes sense to take reasonable steps to slow the spread of an infectious disease. But there are Democrats and folks in the press that treat a mask as a virtue signal, as a sign that you are the Virgin Mary, if they recognize the Virgin Mary as anything good. It is an odd, you see leftists who are saying wear 2 masks, wear 3 masks. Doesn't matter if you're vaccinated. Doesn't matter if you're with people who are vaccinated. The other day, driving down the street in Houston, I saw a guy driving his car alone wearing a mask. Like, what the hell is he doing? Is he afraid of breathing on the ashtray? Like that's weird. But it is being treated as this political statement. I don't think that makes sense either. One of the reasons the vaccine is encouraging is it lets us get back to normal. It lets us go back to work, back to school. It lets us take the damn masks off and live our lives. So I think we ought to be focusing on doing that. Now, on the question of a vaccine passport, I think that would be a very dangerous road to go down for the government. A vaccine passport is essentially the government mandating that you take the vaccine, saying, for example, you can't get on an airplane without having taken the vaccine. If people make a judgment, look, I mentioned in our family, our girls are not taking the vaccine. I don't want the government telling me I've got to give my 10-year-old a vaccine or else we can never fly anywhere. Those are my choices. That is an abuse of government power. People are intelligent, responsible adults can make decisions for their own lives. And with a vaccine, to stop the spread of a pandemic, you want to get to herd immunity. You want a significant percentage of the population immune. That means you don't need everyone. You don't need 100% immune. You need enough immune that the pandemic doesn't spread. You also want, in particular, vulnerable populations immunized because they're the ones most likely to have serious negative health effects. I think a vaccine passport would be a terrible idea. I'm gratified to see that a number of governors, a number of states are acting to try to prevent vaccine passports in their states. I think that's a good step. And for the next 4 years, I think we're going to see governors and state legislatures trying to act as a check on the crazed leftists in Washington. I was encouraged that Jen Psaki said just a few days ago that the Biden administration does not support a vaccine passport, but I think it's a real danger and we should remain vigilant because it is another avenue for the abuse of government power, which unfortunately we have seen at rampant levels throughout this pandemic.
On the same topic as COVID-19, a lot of our network are concerned about even the unseen consequences of the COVID restrictions. Can you talk a little bit about what you think we'll have to do? And you as a senator, assuming that you hang in there, what are some things that conservatives can do in politics and out to make sure that we come out of this, so that it's not another 2008 huge recession from all of the huge fallout from the restrictions? What can you tell us about that?
Well, we've seen a real differential between politics of freedom and politics of government. We have seen big blue states that are still shut down. You know, if you're a restaurant owner in New York City, God help you, because you've got a governor and mayor who don't give a damn about you, who've destroyed your small business, who shut you down. You know, Broadway's been shut down for over a year. You know, if you're a multi-million-dollar actress, you'll be fine. But if you're a gaffer, if you're an electrician, if you man the ticket booth, well, for a year, government has just destroyed your livelihood. And what we've seen, look, in any time of crisis, people's character comes out. It reveals character. We've seen left-wing politicians, number one, eager to destroy small businesses, not caring at all about the lives and livelihoods that they obliterate. We've seen left-wing politicians more than happy to allow millions of kids to fall badly behind in school. As we sit here today, about 40% of school children in America are in-person school 5 days a week. That is an outrage. That is disgraceful. More than half the kids in this country are right now not in-person school 5 days a week. And these kids are falling behind. They're falling behind in reading and writing and arithmetic. They're falling behind in science and art and music. They're falling behind socially. They're facing mental illness. They're facing depression. They're facing substance abuse. And those harms disproportionately fall on low-income parents, on single moms, on African-American kids, on Hispanic kids. The Democrats claim to care about those populations, but they don't give a damn about the millions of kids being left behind. Why? Because they work for the teachers' union bosses, and the teachers' union bosses are insisting that schools stay shut down, even after all the teachers have been vaccinated. It reveals the messed up priorities of the hard left. It is all about politics. It's not about actually helping people. I would note another area that has been highly revealing is the differential enforcement of laws. So we have seen Democratic politicians across the country targeting people of faith, targeting religious expression. So in California, the governor decreed that you cannot go to church, because going to church, if you sing Amazing Grace, you are going to turn that church service into a super spreader event. Now, mind you, that same governor of California says, if you gather with 10,000 people in the streets to scream Black Lives Matter and to burn small businesses, there is no risk of COVID. Zero risk of COVID if you're chanting a political statement they agree with. If you're exercising your constitutionally protected rights of religious liberty, they will shut it down. Thankfully, and you want to talk about one of the legacies of the last 4 years, the judicial nominations, the Supreme Court finally put a stop to it. And it was the confirmation of Justice Amy Coney Barrett that shifted the balance of the court, where the court has now said, you can't have differential standards. You can't do what Nevada has done, which is said churches are shut down, but casinos are just fine. If you want to have a public health standard, you could say any gathering of 100 people is limited. That legally is permissible. But you can't treat people of faith worse than people engaged in secular activity. That's what we've seen Democrat after Democrat after Democrat doing. And I do think it is an opportunity for conservative leaders to contrast. Look, my view, and I think the state of Texas has done pretty well in this regard. I think most people believe in common sense, and most people want to see some reasonable precautions to slow the spread of the disease, to keep our families safe. Things like social distancing, things like masks where they're appropriate. Most people agree with, I agree with. At the same time, most people want to go back to work. They want small businesses open. They want restaurants open. They want stores open. They want kids in school. And we've got to balance those. I think those on the far left have done an abysmal job with it. I think the more free market leaders have done a much better job with it. As we move out of this pandemic, I do think we're going to see the economy come roaring back. But the biggest threat to that is going to be the massive taxes and massive regulations coming from the Biden administration. And those are going to be the worst we've seen in our lifetimes.
Hey, another hot topic right now is freedom of speech and big tech. So
Yes.
I wanted to give you a chance since a lot of our network has asked questions about that. So what can be done to protect freedom of speech in the context of big tech and everything we've seen, especially over the last year?
Well, the power of big tech over political speech and public discourse is massive, and it's unprecedented. You know, from the dawn of time, there have always been biased journalists. From the very first journalist that was carving words in a stone tablet, there were biased journalists. What is different is the power that has been amassed in big tech exceeds anything anyone in media had ever imagined. William Randolph Hearst, at the height of yellow journalism, could not have conceived of the massive power of Google and Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. And the power that they use is stunning, and they're getting more brazen. They're getting far more brazen about silencing the voices of those they disagree with, promoting the voices they agree with. Part of what makes big tech so insidious is it's invisible. If they don't like what you're saying, they can just magically have you disappear into the ether. So you put up a post, nobody sees it. And there's no transparency, there's no visibility. It just fades into nothing. On the other hand, they can collate your feed so you only see the things they want you to see. And so for the last several years, I was the chairman of the Constitution Subcommittee of the Senate Judiciary Committee. So I've chaired multiple hearings on big tech censorship, shining a light on how they're silencing conservatives, they're silencing libertarians, they're silencing pro-life voices, they're silencing pro-Israel voices. They are nakedly favoring left-wing politicians, left-wing causes, and silencing those with which they disagree. I believe big tech poses the biggest threat to free speech in our country. Now, your question was, what can we do about it? And that is a hard question. Nobody in their right mind wants to see a federal government free speech police. That would be a terrible outcome. I think there are at least three possible remedies. Number one, right now, big tech enjoys a special immunity from liability under a federal law called the Communications Decency Act, and in particular, Section 230 of that act, that gives them an immunity from liability that nobody else has. The reason Congress passed this, and this was over 20 years ago that Congress passed it, is because at the time, the internet was nascent, it was just beginning, and they believed that big tech would be neutral public fora. In other words, they would be like the town square, that it wasn't fair to hold Facebook liable for what you or I said on Facebook because it wasn't them speaking, it was whoever the individuals were that were speaking. That premise is no longer true. Big tech has made the decision they are not going to be neutral. They are going to blatantly censor and silence voices they disagree with. If they're not going to be neutral, there's no reason on earth they should get a special immunity from liability, essentially corporate welfare, a federal government subsidy for some of the richest companies on the face of the planet. Number two is the antitrust laws. Under any measure, big tech is bigger, has a greater market cap, has more market control than Standard Oil did when it was broken up. It's bigger than AT&T was when it was broken up. And I believe we should use the antitrust laws aggressively to stop their abuse of monopoly power, which is what they're doing. And number three is a remedy that sounds in consumer protection and deception. And it essentially is the following, which is when you sign up for a social media site, the basic promise they're making to you is that when you post something, the people who've chosen to follow you will see what you post. And when you choose to follow someone, you'll see what they post. Big tech now routinely violates that promise and deceives consumers by stifling views it doesn't like. And so I think all three of those remedies are powerful and should be pursued. Right now, they have to be pursued at the state level, and they have to be pursued in private litigation because the Biden administration and congressional Dems are bought and paid for by big tech, and so they're not going to be willing to stand up to big tech. It's going to have to come at the state level or from the private direction.
Okay, we have one more issue-specific question, then I'm going to give you an opportunity to end on whatever note you would like. So we had a question about renewable energy, and they have kind of assumed peak oil or some version of that, assuming that we will be running out here soon or in just a few generations. What are you and others doing in Congress and in the Senate to, help renewable energy? And how do you think that they will move forward regarding nuclear energy?
Very good question. Let me take the last part first. On nuclear energy, I think the Biden administration will do everything they can to stifle nuclear energy because they're not, in fact, driven by a desire to help the environment. If you want to reduce emissions, nuclear energy by far has the lowest emissions. But the left approaches energy questions not from a perspective of reason or facts or science, but from a perspective of anger and emotion and visceral hatred. Climate change has become the religion of the left, and for many it has filled the place faith used to fill. It is the driving purpose in life for many on the angry left, and it is done in a way that is completely disconnected to the science. I'm someone who believes very much in science. My parents were both mathematicians and computer programmers. I believe we should follow science. We should follow evidence. The left doesn't want to. Anyone who disagrees with their mandated solutions, they brand a denier. And it's worth noting, denier is not the language of science. You actually want people questioning conventional wisdom in science. And denier is the language of religion. It is calling someone a heretic, that you do not believe what we have mandated. And so the climate alarmist consistently say the world is ending. The world is ending typically in 10 or 12 years. And they've been saying that, by the way, for 20 years, and their date is always wrong. Their projections are always wrong. Al Gore predicted the polar ice caps would be melted by now. There is actually more ice on the polar caps today than there was 5 years ago. But that is, as Al Gore would say, an inconvenient truth. So they don't engage in substantive comments. If your objective is to reduce pollution, and by the way, reducing pollution is incredibly important. All of us breathe air and drink water. We want clean air. We want clean water. We want our kids to be able to breathe and drink water. We want our grandkids to be able to breathe and drink water. The angry left isn't focused on reducing pollution. If they were, they would not be engaged in an absolute jihad to destroy America's energy production, which their objective, they want to destroy nuclear, they want to destroy coal, they want to destroy oil and gas, they want to destroy all of them. Here's another inconvenient truth. Do you know which country last year had the greatest reduction of carbon emissions of any country on planet Earth? The answer is the United States of America. Why is that? The reason for that is the shale revolution, the growth of natural gas, that fracking is unlocked, and America is the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. We're the number one producer of natural gas in the world. We're the number one producer of oil in the world. And in particular, with electricity power generation, there's been a massive substitution from coal electricity generation to natural gas electricity generation, the latter of which pollutes much, much less and produces much less carbon dioxide. That's why we're seeing massive reduction in pollution. If the left actually cared about fixing that, they would want to see more of it. Instead, they're trying to destroy natural gas and destroy oil production. And when it comes to green energy, listen, I believe in green energy. Texas is the number one producer of wind energy in the country. We produce more than California. They produce a lot of politician hot air. We actually produce electricity from windmills. But what we have seen consistently is it's not government that effectively drives innovation in energy. And low-cost, abundant energy is what has driven economic prosperity across this country. It's what's driven hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs coming back to America from China and overseas, is the availability of low-cost, abundant energy, so that we're competing not based on low wages, but based on low-cost energy. The Biden administration is trying to end that, is trying to massively drive up the cost of energy, which will disproportionately hurt working class people, African Americans, Hispanics. My view on energy is we should follow an all of the above approach that should focus on abundant, low-cost energy, America being energy independent. And when it comes to the environment, we should focus on reducing air pollution and water pollution. That's not the left's objective. The left's objective is to shut down industries they don't like. That's profoundly harmful, I think, to the country.
Thank you for that. And again, I'll give you an opportunity to end on whatever note you'd like. I encourage people to end on a positive note because I know a lot of us can get down these days. So go ahead.
Well, thank you, Deirdre. Let me say thank you to everyone for being on this call. Thank you for participating, and thank you for having the courage of your convictions, for standing up and fighting for what you believe in. I do want to end on a positive and optimistic note, which is there is a natural pendulum to politics. Right now, the crazy left, they're going too far. The Democrats are captive to the socialists in their party. It is AOC and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren who's setting the agenda. The further they go, the more it produces the natural counter reaction of America moving back towards sanity. And so I believe we're going to see a very, very good election in 2022 and a very good election in 2024. And so that is important. We've got to survive the next 2 years and the next 4 years, and that's going to be a battle. But the more they overshoot, the more likely we are to go back towards sanity, towards freedom, towards defending our rights. Let me say, secondly, I think it's important to communicate and to communicate outside the avenues that the left controls. So if you look at last year, there are two big initiatives I did last year. Number one, I launched a podcast. The podcast is called Verdict with Ted Cruz. We launched it January of last year. It became the #1 ranked podcast in the world. We put it out every week. It's about a half hour. It's diving into substance on issues. If you guys don't subscribe to it, let me encourage you to subscribe to Verdict with Ted Cruz, because it goes around the media gatekeepers and it gets substance and facts straight to people. And we've had now, I think, north of 27 million downloads. So we are communicating directly with the people. Number two, last year, I wrote my second book, and the book is called One Vote Away: How a Single Supreme Court Seat Can Change History. And what the book does is each chapter addresses a different constitutional liberty. There's a chapter on free speech. There's a chapter on religious liberty. There's a chapter on the Second Amendment. There's a chapter on democracy and elections. And it takes readers behind the curtain. It takes readers into what's really happening at the Supreme Court. Before I was in the Senate, I was a Supreme Court litigator. And so I tell war stories of litigating some of the biggest landmark decisions of the court. Decision after decision after decision was 5-4, one vote away from losing our liberties. I wrote that book, again, to communicate going around the mainstream media that is so wildly biased. So I want to encourage folks, if you haven't bought it, go to Amazon, go wherever you get your books and buy One Vote Away and give it to your friends, give it to your family, because we've got to communicate why freedom matters. We've got to communicate why free markets matter. We've got to communicate why religious liberty and free speech and the Second Amendment matter. Margaret Thatcher famously said, "First you win the argument, then you win the vote." What LI does is wins the argument, is engages and fights on the grassroots. It mobilizes the American people. And the way we make sure that that pendulum shifts from crazy left back in a reasonable center-right direction is by mobilizing and educating and being evangelists for liberty. And that's what each of you are. And so thank you for your passion. Thank you for your commitment. And I am emphatically convinced America's brighter days are ahead of us, not behind. And it is thanks to the hard work of the men and women on this call that that's the case.
Great. Thank you so much for being on today, Senator Cruz. We really appreciate you spending the time with us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. And to our audience, thank you also for joining us today. I hope that you can join us again on May 5 for our next virtual Wednesday Wicked Club breakfast. I encourage you to RSVP online at leadershipinstitute.org/breakfast. And until next time, stay well.